Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Chasing Quality Podcast. This is episode 50. I'm Jake, and with us, as always, RJ. RJ, how you doing today, sir?
You know, I'm making it. I'm
making it?
Yeah, I'm
Are you
vertical.
faking it till you make it?
Nah, well,
No,
maybe. I don't know. How about you? How are you doing this morning?
I'm good. Busy. Mine's a little scattered, but I'm good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good.
I guess you want me to go into that?
Yeah,
Is that why
yeah,
you're pausing?
I do. I do want you to go into that.
Well, I've got this I've got this project I'm working on. I've mentioned it before. It's a web project, and I've probably spent like a year working on this thing, and I don't know, man. I need to get it out. I've got like a smaller, like a beta version out. I haven't really advertised it. I've had a few friends check it out, but I really need to get this next version pushed out. And as I'm learning more and more about the software, it's based on Django and Python and JavaScript. I'm just realizing the inefficiency of some of my code. And so I kind of keep going back and refactoring, but every time I do that, then I run into other issues and it keeps taking me down these small rabbit holes. But I'm very, very close. I'm hoping in the next week or so, I keep telling myself that though, but in the next week or so to get this first regular stable version out for more people to use it.
Yeah.
But yesterday I probably worked on it for, I don't know, it was probably 12 or 13 hours.
Oh man.
I was down in the basement all day, and then around 5 or 6 o'clock, I was finally going cross-eyed, and so I just had to stop and go upstairs. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just coding away.
Yeah, coding away.
Well, unfortunately, the majority of my day yesterday was spent building a. I want to say unfortunately, because normally it's a cool thing, building a computer. But then I was up into the middle of the night getting all the software squared away so that we could be ready for today. I guess maybe we should real quick make a note that we're doing this video and audio.
Yeah.
So we'll have, of course, the podcast over wherever you get your podcast, and then we're going to be having this up on our YouTube channel for our viewers there, and kind of maybe bring some people into the other folds, because we got a big one today, right?
Yeah, you're excited. You've been waiting for this for about 50 episodes, haven't you?
I've been wanting to talk to you about this for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're like the guy on the street corner with a little book in his hand,
telling
people to save themselves, right?
Yeah, man. You gotta
That's how I met you. You were out on a street corner somewhere, and you had a book in your hand, and you said, "Hey, have you read this book?"
Yeah.
I said, "No, I have not."
And you said, "What's that book?" And I said, "Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance."
Yeah. So
by Robert Pirsig.
Yeah. So we've been talking about it. We've mentioned it several times on the show before. But today we're actually going to focus on the book itself. You've read the book several times. I've read it now twice. The first time I did it as an audiobook. And this last time around, I read it as text.
Okay.
So part of the reason why it took me a little bit longer.
So let me ask you on that just first. First off, how far apart did you listen to it and read it? What kind of a time frame?
Maybe 18 months.
Okay.
Maybe 2 years, maybe something like that.
Did you feel like you engaged with it? I mean, obviously you engaged with it differently, but what was your experience of that difference? Or was there one? Maybe you didn't experience it.
Oh gosh. I just realized that my headphones are overexposed to my camera. I think that I think this time around I did a little bit more reflecting on myself, and seeing myself in Phaedrus, or in Robert as the author, the narrator too. I was actually kind of pleased with myself that I picked up a lot of the book the first time as an audiobook. Sometimes, if it's not a very good audiobook, it goes in one ear and out the other, although that can happen reading text as well.
Yeah.
But I did remember, quite a bit of it. So this time around, I took a few more pauses and kind of reflected and, highlighted certain portions and thought about them a little bit and how they related to me. But yeah, how about you? I mean, you You've read it now, what, 5 times, 6 times, maybe?
I think 5 times, either 5 or 6. So for me, each time I I find myself being struck by different parts.
Hmm.
Um, and to me, that just speaks to the quality of the book. It's like maybe like Pink Floyd's The Wall, which we've spoken
Yeah.
about before, right?
Hmm.
You listen to that, and depending on where you're at mentally, different, portions of that are going to strike you, right? Maybe it's Mother and these songs because you're looking at family issues, or maybe it's One of My Turns because you're not having the best go of things. Maybe it's The Trial. You know what I mean? So every time I read this, and if I'm reading it on my Kindle, I'll find that I highlight something that I've never highlighted before, right? Um,
It's an interesting point that you make, and it was something that I was kind of thinking about that state of mind. You know, uh, Robert Pirsig is an author. He wrote one story, but that one story was read as millions of different stories. The way that people, and he kind of touches on this in the book. I mean, it's a different concept as he's pushing it, but it applies that mythos versus logos, and where we go into a situation, everything that we've been told before, all of our our reference frame, right?
mm,
That's what that's how we interpret what we're seeing now.
mm-hmm.
And so somebody reading this book, and even the same person reading it, may read different stories. You
Oh
may
yeah.
apply those things differently, right? You've changed your kind of in this programming mindset. You've refactored some of your functions, and now all of a sudden they're spitting out different different answers. And so that's that's the takeaway, is that he wrote it in one way and probably wanted people to interpret it in that way, but it was interpreted millions of different ways.
Well, yeah, it's like art in
Hmm.
that, right? Whoever is viewing it or taking it in is going to
Hmm.
come away with something different. And so I guess first start off with what the book is.
Yeah.
Um, so it's either in the foreword or the afterword, he writes, this book is not a text on Zen Buddhism, neither is it very factual about motorcycles either. Yet the title is Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And it's ostensibly the story of a father and son on a cross country motorcycle journey. At the beginning, they're accompanied by two friends. The the lady for the longest time I believed was his daughter because of a quote in the book, not a quote in the book, but a passage in the book. But as Jake and I discussed it, um, came to the realization that in fact it wasn't. They were just friends.
Hmm.
Um, well, anyway, and then dispersed throughout the book are these breakups. At the beginning, he's calling them chautauquas. So there's basically, as I see it, about three forms in which the book happens, right? Three vignettes or three time frames. So one is the current timeline of the trip he's on
Hmm.
with his son. One is the Chautauquas that he speaks on, and I believe that's a Native American word. He gives the definition in the book, but in that he's talking about his current philosophy of life, of friendships, of everything,
Hmm.
working on motorcycles, you name it. And then the third, he's relaying a person's story, a past person's story. And that, as Jake and I have come to find, those disparate parts throws some people off,
Hmm.
right? Some people don't like it being split up like that. They don't like, at times, jarring
Hmm.
switches. To me, I believe he does that on purpose. So you have to pay attention. Oh, this is what he's doing now. Let me recenter.
Hmm.
He lives a very deliberate life now in this book. And I think that's what he's hoping, yeah, either to instill or to call out in people, is that pay attention. Because maybe I'm not doing what you think I'm doing.
Hmm.
Um, so how does that strike you
Yeah, yeah.
as a
It's probably worth.
brief?
I was gonna say it's probably worth mentioning. There will be spoilers for anybody who hasn't read the book. There will be spoilers in here, but it's nothing that you wouldn't find anywhere else.
Right. Well, I mean, we'll try to keep it.
And I don't know. I'm going to spoil it.
All right.
But I'm not going to try to put too much of my own analysis on it.
Mm,
It's hard not to. But yeah, no, I think that's good. I think the way that he writes the book, honestly, is probably a little bit more natural to how his mind thinks. And honestly, I'm okay with that because it's kind of how my mind thinks.
hmm
You've got this objective world around you that's going on. He says we're pulling into this gas station, we're pulling into this whatever, and he's in those that one thread, if you will, or that one story about him and his son Chris going on the motorcycle trip across the country. He's saying, we're camping here, we're doing whatever, right? It's very factual. There's a little bit of opinion in there, but it's mostly just very factual. At the same time, what's really going on in his mind and why his son sees him always with this blank look is that he's got all this deep stuff that he's going through and he's thinking about,
hmm
whether it be his own self from the past or trying to, reconcile what's going on now. And um, I think that disturbs some people because they want that, like you said, they want that one story.
hmm
Um, maybe they want to be told, but he's kind of telling this in what I would consider a more natural way, at least for his, kind of personality.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know if we really necessarily touched on it, but it is worth mentioning that in a way, this is somewhat autobiographical.
hmm
I'm sure he took some liberties, and he doesn't necessarily get into what was 100% true and what was 100%, 100% false. But it was, a lot of these facts line up with his real life, and it's pretty interesting. I mean, it's interesting because you can find in there when he talks about like University of Chicago later on. I mean, all that stuff for the most part happened, and those were real people.
hmm
Um, so it's
Yeah, he speaks to that. He says that the some of the way the story is told doesn't, like, it's been changed a bit,
mhm,
but that it should be able to be considered as factual,
right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it was written I've got it up here, 1974.
Yeah, that's when it was published. Yeah.
And so I think it's also one of those books where right now we've got there certain movements to again ban books or remove books or have certain things. But taken in context, this book is now almost 50 years old, so 47 years old. I didn't think there's anything offensive in there, but I mean, anytime you read these things, you read them in the context of the times,
Right.
things that were going on in the 70s. There was very much I guess it was maybe the hippie movement, in the 60s and 70s. And he touches on some of that and,
hmm
what was going on in the country at the time. And of course, when he was teaching at University of Chicago, or he was learning at University of Chicago, I don't think he actually taught there. He was teaching University of Illinois. But that would have been probably the 50s, 40s or 50s, probably 50s. Um, and he touches on that a little bit too, about what the culture was at the time. So um, I I would say, before we really quite get into this, because
hmm
you kind of mentioned it, and my thought of that haters are going to hate. Um, this book had a mixed reception when
He
it
went
came out.
through many, many, many rejections
Yeah, I think he said
before it
like
finally got.
30 some publishers maybe, and he finally got it published.
Yeah.
It's not a small book. It's not a huge book, but it's not a small book. Um, and it was one of those things where not everybody's going to want to read it. And, so take it for what it's worth. I think that for some people it's like chicken soup, right?
Mm.
But you've got chicken soup for the motorcycle rider's soul, chicken soup for the Zen motorcycle, all these different books, and it's not gonna be chicken soup for everybody.
No.
But this might be. So I did very much enjoy the book.
Yeah, it's
Um,
something that you have to be, and I'm going to use the word deliberate a
mhm,
lot during this,
yeah,
but you have to read it deliberately,
yeah,
my opinion.
yeah.
It's not a novel. It's not, I mean, it is a novel,
Mhm,
but it's not just brain candy, right?
yeah.
It's
It's
not
not weekend at the beach reading.
no offense to any fans of, but it's not a Dan Brown novel.
Yeah.
You're not just going to like be taken along and swept and get to the end and say, "Wow," you know? You're going to be challenged.
I bet Tom
Uh,
Hanks could play him though. I bet he'd be a pretty good guy
yeah, actually.
in the movie.
Um, so I don't know how you want to approach this.
So, okay,
There's
so
many, many, many directions from which we could
Here,
come.
here's how I think I want to approach this, because we could fill up hours talking about this book.
Yep.
I mean, if it was just kind of like um, a simple book review, then that would be different. But that's not really how you and I roll. So I think we gave a very brief overview. It's about he's basically taking his son Chris on a cross country motorcycle trip. They start off and they're with a couple friends on a separate motorcycle. And as they go across the United States, which we eventually learn, I think, I interpret it as, in a way, it's like it's his own quest. He's trying to retrace some steps, trying to get some facts straight in his mind, at the same time, probably trying to maybe explain some things to Chris, to give Chris some context that he lacked. As he's doing that, he's telling the story, of course, of the motorcycle ride. He's got the Chautauquas where he's, talking a little bit about motorcycle maintenance and then about Zen and about all these other things. Um, we eventually learn about his past self, um, and I think that's generally what it is. So that's with the brief overview. My thought was then, as an elevator speech, what impact has this book had on you, RJ? Now, elevator speech, because I know you could talk for hours, but
Yeah, yeah.
keep it to a few
So
minutes.
like the elevator pitch or whatever you
Yeah,
call
yeah,
it.
yeah.
I mean, it's been very impactful for me. That's why I love it so much.
Hmm.
I believe it has very strongly shaped how I think, and if not shaped, solidified, brought out, intensified what already there maybe was the groundwork for. Um, yeah, that's my elevator pitch.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's
That's short too. Like you could
it
do
is
that one
short.
in the time that the elevator opened and closed.
It is short. For me, I don't know if I would say it was a game changer. And it would have been maybe similar, is that I don't know, there are many days that I feel like uh, the character in the book that he refers to, which is Phaedrus, or some people pronounce it Phaedrus. I'm gonna go with Phaedrus. I feel very similar to him in a
Hmm.
lot of ways, and so uh, a lot of what he's talking about in there, I'm just kind of relating throughout, right? And I guess as I reflect on those things, it did help me to find either some comfort or some ways to address things, and just other thoughts that help me to clarify things in my mind. I honestly, the actual trip itself, the motorcycle trip, those were parts that I very quickly skimmed through. It was
Hmm.
interesting as a backdrop, right? To let me know, okay, he's now talking about this. They happen to be in Montana. Okay, now I have the context of where he is physically located and thinking these more deep thoughts.
Right.
I think that's why, going to the book, some people maybe don't like the book, is because they want the story, and that it's not that that story's not developed.
Oh, it's
It's
developed.
just that on its own, it probably wouldn't be a complete story. And you've got this jump between this concrete kind of story of riding the motorcycle and this very abstract philosophical journey. And I think people have trouble bridging between those. Maybe they don't want to bridge between those. Maybe that's not what they're in the mood for.
Right.
But for me, again, I read the whole thing, but those parts, it wasn't like I was sitting reflecting, oh, he's sitting in a bar and, whatever's going on. It didn't give me much pause. It was when he kind of went back into his mind and started kind of talking there. So, and
So two
that's,
things, if I
yeah.
could.
Mm-hmm.
I identify more with his current
Yeah.
character,
Mm-hmm.
the narrator.
Yeah.
As a father, I know you're a father as well, but that's just where I see it for myself. For me, the point of not glossing over, but that the trip was not as important as the Chautauquas and the other stuff that occurred in the past. The main point of that trip in the story is key in my mind to the outcome, and this is going to be a spoiler. They were taking that trip for a couple reasons. He was retracing some of those steps because we see some reflections where he has some recognition, right?
Mm-hmm.
In these locations. And then he was taking that trip to say goodbye to his son.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he was doing. And then in addition to that, the vignettes that he paints for us in those things, in those modern day settings in the book, are tied directly to the Chautauqua. They're tied directly to what he touches on, right? That's why I don't feel like they're disjointed the way the other podcast you had listened to.
Mm-hmm.
They felt that they were very disjointed.
Mm-hmm.
And I disagree with that person's take.
Yeah.
Because to me, there's a direct correlation with why he tells this or speaks that Chautauqua or tells this thing from the past after the story of, the fouled plugs or being out of gas or the carburetor running too rich or too lean,
Mm-hmm.
right? He then touches on
Right.
the thought process that he either failed in it from his point of view or that could have been seen, is at least how I see it. But I interrupted you.
So you make a point. So you identify maybe a little bit more with the narrator, and I'd said I identify with Phaedrus, but toward the end,
We should probably give the spoilers that.
Well, I was about to give the spoiler. Is that
Okay.
he at the end when Chris is mad at him throughout most of the trip,
Mm-hmm.
and at the end it kind of comes out that Chris is kind of mad because the guy that Chris is with throughout the trip is not really his dad. It's this guy his dad is pretending to be, which would be in general, maybe, I don't know if you consider that the narrator or consider it, Robert, but it's almost, it's the object of his dad as opposed to, maybe the substance or the subject of his dad. And so at the end, he comes out and says that, he's basically been Phaedrus, but he was subjected to electric shock therapy when he was committed. And later on, he basically says he has adopted this persona in order to basically survive.
Right.
And I guess that's where I kind of relate to both. And I relate to, I feel like there are these motions that we have to go through on a day-to-day basis because of the way, society demands certain things from us. But then maybe there's the person that we really wish that we could be, or that we really are, whether we wish to be that or not, I don't know.
Right.
And we have to often reconcile that. And so for him, he's going through this constant pain, maybe struggle. Chris sees the struggle because what it leaves in his in this guy that's with him, this guy that's pretending to be his father, right? He sees this shell of a man who is not the colorful character that he once was,
Right.
prior to getting committed in the shock treatment. And Chris talks about it a little bit. The narrator talks about how Phaedrus was insane. Or early on, he says it. He's insane. He's running around. He's doing these things. He's going down these rabbit holes, chasing quality, right? Um, and Chris liked that. At the same time, there were obviously issues with that begets a lot of trouble.
Right.
And so I don't know if you find what I say to be accurate, but that's how I interpret it. How I interpreted the end of it, and where he in the end says, "No, I wasn't insane." Throughout he's kind of saying, "Yeah, he was insane. He was insane. He was saying what society wanted him to say." And he was being that just simply to be able to survive because he did not want to be, shocked or whatever. In order to get out of that place, he had to pretend to be what they wanted him to be.
So yes and no, I agree with you. He did lose his mind. Did he need to be electroshock therapy? Did he need to be committed? I don't know. I couldn't speak to that.
Yeah.
But he did lose his mind in the sense of the phrase. And he became disconnected from his family. Eventually even from Chris. And so when he says at the end, either I'm not or I wasn't insane, it's because the character of the narrator has wrapped both real life and this push toward that chase for quality and married them, right? It's no longer just this blind, headlong dive of, this college professor that he eschewed all other things for that chase. And now he's able to bring it back together, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, fair enough. Yeah. And again, I think that we all read it and read a different story. Right?
Yeah, I think it leaves enough to the imagination. So
yeah. So all right. So with that, then I thought maybe we could go into some of the more impactful parts. You and I both had gone through and we highlighted at least I assume you highlighted quite a bit. I highlighted the snot out of this thing. I've got probably a couple hundred notes here. And we've got it up on our Kindle Cloud Reader. And for those that have Kindles and have not used this Kindle Cloud Reader, it's mighty cool. You can take your notes on your little Kindle device, and then you can log into the Kindle Cloud Reader, and it shows you all of your notes, and you can easily go back to them, and you can see them on a different screen. So very cool.
it is.
So maybe we could go. I don't know if you want to go somewhat chronologically. How you want to do this, RJ? I've got way too many notes here to touch on all of them, but there may be some that are profound that are worth talking about and quickly reflecting on. We can probably get through, I don't know, half dozen if we're lucky.
Yeah, I am okay with any of those methods.
Okay.
To be honest.
Well, let's just start throwing some out here, and I think this is where the book was really good for me. As there were statements that were in there. There were sentences, words, sayings in there that gave me a lot of pause and something to reflect on.
Yeah.
And that's what I really liked. And one of the first ones that I came across that I highlighted was he made the statement, "The truth knocks on the door and you say, 'Go away. I'm looking for the truth.' And so it goes away."
Yeah.
Puzzling. That's what he says.
I have that one as well.
Find that to be quite, quite true, is that we say we're looking for the truth, sometimes the truth is right there in front of our face, but we tell it to go away because we don't believe it is the truth, or there's a different truth that we're seeing. And so, we've had an episode about this before, right? About whether or not truth really matters.
Right.
And truth, although we all individually want to say it's an objective thing, I think that it's probably more subjective than we are willing to accept. And one man's truth is another man's fiction, I guess.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you had any thoughts about that one, or if you just wanted to jump into the next.
No, that's 100%. I had that one. It was very, very well placed, and I think in that, when he gives that Chautauqua that has that quote in it, that was potentially near it was near one of the troubleshooting points, I think, on the bike, where he was either telling another story of them on a trip where they turned around because they were actually out of gas, but it was the last thing he would have looked for, or something that was happening in the current trip. But I feel like that was how he tied that one,
Mm-hmm.
because the motorcycle will tell you everything you need to know. I'm an avid motorcyclist and a hobbyist mechanic, and so it's there. The signs are there to tell you what's happening, what's going on.
Yeah, if so long as you've got the mind to see them. And he talks about that later, is that sometimes we get so set in our ways, or fixated on a frame of reference, that we're not able to see things and take them in. And that's where he gets into later the mythos and the logos and all of that. And so I find that to be a really good one.
Definitely.
What do you have? What's
as what, another quote, or on that?
Because I can keep throwing them out there, but if you've got
you go ahead. You go ahead for another one.
Well, and there was another one that was simple. It was just a few pages later. It was just simple. This question of what is best, and we've had that conversation before. It's not terribly deep, I guess, but I'm always thinking that, and it's how subjective we are in our analysis, and we want to put it as fact.
Right.
Somebody comes out and says, "This is best," and that begets a lot of questions. Best for whom? Best compared to what? And I don't know. I always like that question. So
no, that I also have that one marked.
Mm-hmm. All
right. So that, and just for my own sanity, this is where I got that it was his daughter.
Mm-hmm.
He's talking to her. I can't think of her name off the top of my head, but he says, the narrator says of her, she thinks for a while, and then with the trees behind her a deep green, she smiles. She understands a peculiar language which has nothing to do with what you are saying. A daughter. And so, like, to me, I guess what he's probably getting at there is that's how maybe he views her, and so, and maybe they have that strong of a bond, and that's why, he comes with that phrase that made me think that, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that the reason why, I think it was my research outside of the book that then made me question that, because I think the first time I read the book, I didn't realize how much of an autobiography it was. And the second time I was reading it, I was realizing that it very much was. There was, I'd highlighted something. It's not really a deep quote, but he's talking about, so he and Chris are driving. It's this other couple. What was the name? John and what was the name of that couple?
Yeah, that's what I failed to just remember.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the name of the couple. Anyway, so there's this couple with them, and they've kind of got this issue with technology, right? And so he says, I just think that their flight from and hatred of technology is self-defeating. And we had that conversation it was last episode, the episode before, we were talking about whether or not technology makes our lives better. Mm-hmm. And it is this question. It's this question for the ages, I guess. We advance, but are we necessarily happier for it? And throughout the book, this kind of sets the stage for this um, this tension between romanticism and classicism, as he describes them,
Yeah.
form versus function, I guess, in a way, and how that all fits into quality. And in a way, they had a certain quality they were chasing, but he, is the early on as a narrator, kind of
Right.
rejected it, right? Because he was trying to suppress Phaedrus. He was trying to suppress this other side of himself. So I have that one highlighted.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's a big one that at least is heavy in the first, like maybe quarter of
Hmm.
the book, I think, where and what he's doing is he's setting up the later, they're like the pillars of the argument that's
Hmm.
coming, right? And he very much, because he speaks about systems and systems of the motorcycle and how you can view it as, um, either from this angle as a motorcycle, or you can view, from the fuel system, or whatever. And they enjoyed the motorcycle for the freedom it gave them,
Hmm.
right? To get away from everything.
Hmm.
But they feared the technology that was reflected in that motorcycle that was very similar to what they were using the motorcycle to
Hmm.
rebel against. And they could not synthesize those two things. And, so he would rather have, John would rather have the motorcycle that was newest and just worked, so he didn't have to think about it. Um, and to me, and this takes me back exactly to what you were saying at the beginning about how the book was written, right? Where it's to some people it feels like it's jumping around, but to me, and as you said it to you, it's it's that there's this story and then there's also this story, right? There's I'm going to the store. I'm talking to my wife about our upcoming move or what's going to be for dinner. But then sometimes my reaction to things that she says is because of something else, an undercurrent, something else that's going on in my life. And they're inextricable,
Hmm.
right? They're linked. And so if you fail to pay attention to those undercurrents, you're not going to understand why you're doing these things in the real world here,
Hmm.
right? And vice versa. If you're too worried about the undercurrents, you go the way of Phaedrus and you lose it because you're not paying attention to what's happening right here in the current time.
Right.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's we have these. I can't help but think of it in the um, context of like programming, but you've got these, I wouldn't call them bugs, but these things in your mind, right? These other
right,
functions that are sitting there, and you maybe forget about them. And our brains are multi-threaded processors, and so you've got this one thing coming at you, but your mind's still processing all of this other stuff, and something comes in and calls a function somewhere, and your brain starts reacting. And
right,
you've kind of got to go back through and refactor that and say, what exactly is in that code there that's causing that? If things aren't working right, if the way I'm reacting is different than the way that I intend to react, what's the bug?
right,
What is being triggered, right?
right. So
Um,
I hate to make this the next quote to talk about because
okay.
I would desperately love. I'm going to
Yeah.
obviously by the way I'm leading in,
Hmm.
but because I would want people to have this same experience that I did,
Okay.
right? But what are we going to talk about on this podcast if we don't talk about the link between Phaedrus and the the narrator?
Hmm.
So it's very early on in the book, and they're riding along, and it's they're going through a storm,
Hmm.
right? And so it starts out, and so lightning starts striking. And I'm going to read, and he says, a second flash, wham, and everything brilliant. And then in the brilliance of the next flash, that farmhouse, that windmill, oh my God, he's been here. Right? This whole time he's been talking about Phaedrus.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe he hasn't even mentioned him yet, I forget. But he says he's been here. And he slows the bike way down because he's got his kid on the back and he doesn't want to wreck, right? That's your first window in. Things aren't what they seem,
Mm-hmm.
right? He's not just talking about this guy he knows of, he's heard of. He has knowledge that he couldn't have if that were the case, right? And that was just, it gave me chills reading it. Like
Mm-hmm.
it hits me every time.
Yeah, that's probably what, around page 60 to 70, somewhere around there.
For me, it shows that it's 26.
Oh,
I don't
interesting.
know.
Okay, so maybe early on, but, and by the way, I found the name Sylvia. It's John and Sylvia are
There
the
it is.
are the couple they're with. But that kind of leads into the next one that I wanted to touch on, where he starts to talk about the conflict that he has. I would just have to read this section. He says, Sylvia waves her arms up and down, and I beep the horn in response. But when I look at the sign, my feelings are not jubilant at all. For me, its information causes a sudden inward tension that can't exist for them. They've no way of knowing we're in the country where he lived. We're now in the country where he lived. All this talk so far about classic and romantic understanding must seem a strangely oblique way of describing him. But to get at Phaedrus, this oblique route is the only way to take. To describe his physical appearance or the statistics of his life would be to dwell on misleading superficialities, and to come at him directly would be to invite disaster. So this sets up the rest of the book because he doesn't come at him directly. And then this is the quote that I actually had highlighted. He says, he was insane. When you look directly at an insane man, all you see is a reflection of your own knowledge that he's insane, which is not to see him at all. And I think that that's really what it is these people who saw him as insane, right? He was committed, right? They had no idea who he really was. All they saw was this insane man based on what they were told was insane.
Right.
This equals insane. They label him as insane, and so it shuts down, right? So,
well, and I don't disagree with you, because he touches later that because he's trying to wrestle with what really happened, I think. And he says at one point that people who are viewed as insane, they don't grok the mythos of the society they're in.
right.
Right? And so since they don't, others see him as insane.
Mm-hmm.
But we have too many other points of knowledge from him about himself in this book that he lost it.
Mm-hmm.
Now that doesn't necessarily mean insane. It means he lost focus, right? And that's why I said lost his mind. Used that phrase because insane, like I said, I don't know. We have conflicting information from him. But he did, in fact, lose that connection to the family, lose that, like he gave up everything, right? Job, family, and the point at which, because he gives us the point at which he was treading so close to that line, Phaedrus was. He was talking about when he gave quality primacy in the thought process, that it comes before all things, right? And he says something about that's it. That's the whole of it. And he says that's dangerously close to the edge, right? And that edge is the same place he finds himself during this trip, because he starts receding again as he's battling with himself, so to speak. And then he grabs hold of it when he gives the quote that you gave earlier on about, no, I wasn't. I'm here, Chris. This is me. This is your father that you've known. And I think that's the difference, right? It's the catching of the tiger by the tail, or the lightning in the jar. he's no longer allowing the chase for the quality to drive him. He's saying, I see it, I know what's the thing, and I'm going to be in control,
Hmm.
so to speak.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Fair enough.
be a functioning um, mental dweller
Hmm.
rather than a non-functioning mental
Right.
dweller.
Yeah. I think my takeaway is that I feel like he's showing that, the whole idea of insanity is subjective, as are a lot of things. And as you mentioned, it's based on, I guess the mythos of whatever the society is that he's living in. He comes at the world differently,
Hmm.
and to them he's going to definitely seem insane. And that was he really touches on that whole theory later in the book when he starts getting more into philosophy. But um, I see that day to day, and I've really been noodling on that one probably for the last few weeks and thinking about the way that we look at different societies, right? And how
Hmm.
we often and Americans are pretty good at this, good not being good, of having this idea that we are the chosen ones, that we are always righteous, right? And anything that other societies do must be wrong. And wow, look at them, they're insane. They do things X, Y, and Z this way. And really it's because, their whole existence, our whole existence is shaped by whatever the mythos is of our society, right?
Right.
And so it's just, I don't know, nothing new or earth shattering, but
Well, yeah,
I
and
find it something to noodle on.
I don't think we disagree. I
Hmm.
think we agree loudly,
Hmm.
and we agree. It's like many things, right? We very often want the same outcome, but our path to get there, we might see that as better to get there differently,
Hmm.
right? And I think that's what we're seeing in how because we've kept ourselves from talking about this, y'all. This is our first real um, go at it. So I found the quote is where he says, "There's only one kind of person," Phaedrus said. So this is Phaedrus's point of view. Um, who accepts or rejects the mythos in which he lives. And the definition of that person, when he has rejected the mythos, Phaedrus said, is insane. To go outside the mythos is to
Hmm.
become insane. Because you're now saying, I don't accept what everybody else
Yeah.
accepts. And then when they see you not accept it, then we go to the thinking that you just delineated for us very clearly that, well, you're different. That can't be right.
Yeah.
And that's so wrong, obviously.
Well, and in a way it's kind of funny because in business talk, right? The mythos now would be what they would call the box. And they always want people to think outside the box, right? But the box declares anybody who's outside of it to be insane. And I guess just for our listeners, the to clarify, the mythos that he refers to is you can think of it as mythology, but it's really like the set of collective beliefs, I guess, that a society holds. The stories they tell, whether factual or not factual, science or not science, it's whatever. There's this collective belief
Right.
system. So that's what we're talking about. And the logos, I guess, would be that which those things, those decisions that we make based on that, or the way we think because of that. So yeah,
And again, neither of us are professional
no,
anythings,
no,
much less philosophers.
yeah,
And so I'm just doing my best
yeah.
as it feels to me, right?
Hmm.
As it
Right.
speaks to me.
Hmm. All right. So do you have? Let's see. We're moving along here. Where are we at
Sorry, I'm not
here?
looking at over here at the camera. I got my screen over here.
Oh, yeah. I'll apologize. I'm not looking. I'm looking at your face on my screen, not at the camera. It's awkward to not see. All right. Pause for effect.
No doubt. So, after that part is is well, the part I last quoted, where he gives, Phaedrus's definition of the insane, is when then the book really starts building in those, the parts that we're probably not going to touch on too much, where he's relaying to us Phaedrus's dismantling of the arguments that led to our current mythos, if you will, in the philosophical world. And it gets deep. It gets to the part where I have to stop and look up a name or a concept, right? And I think that might be something that could potentially be, what he calls a gumption trap.
Mhm.
Um, when you're working on something and all of a sudden, because of your lack of preparation, or lack of knowledge, which would be preparation, you just get stuck, you know. And I think that could be a difficulty for some people. And what I would just encourage people to do is just keep at it. You don't have to know every single thing to enjoy it. I don't, obviously, by listening to me, I don't understand, many of these, the history of this thought progression that led to what, Phaedrus was fighting against, what, you know, the narrator, what Pirsig is speaking to at the beginning when he's comparing that romantic and classic understanding of things. That's that undercurrent like you were talking about.
Mhm.
And if you don't understand all those things in the sense of who said what, when they said it, in response to whom, all that, I honestly don't believe that matters for understanding the gist of the book and where the book is going, because he draws enough real world examples and explains it to you so that you don't feel as though you're lost in a sea. Because people go to college for very long periods of time just to understand portions of these arguments.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And so read it, pick up what you like, go here, do some research on the different actors that he speaks about in the historical arguments, and you'll get along just fine and enjoy
Yeah.
it. So,
Yeah, for sure. Um, I'm there's one a little bit later on. It's a kind of a simple phrase that I had. He
mm,
says, "Sometimes it's a little better to travel than to arrive." I think we've talked about that a little bit before too. Is
yeah,
that sometimes it's really just the journey, and once you're there where you wanted to go, you're like, "Oh, this is it." Now, I think that the context for that was a little bit different. Wherever he was, he said, "I feel happy to be here, and still a little sad to be here too."
right.
Um, but sometimes you get to a place and you don't necessarily want to be there. It was the
Yeah.
getting there that was the enjoyment.
Well, because the narrator thought he knew what was coming,
Right.
which that's another life lesson, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's what I like about this book is it if you're looking at it for these different things, it's all there. I mean, and it's probably all there in any well-written book that's a story, right? You probably will find all of these lessons because they're basic human nature,
Hmm.
experience, and I don't know. I just love this book, man.
You do?
So, yeah, a little bit.
I'm not sure if I realized that. Here, here's where he starts getting into. He starts kind of setting the stage for the Church of Reason. He says he felt that institutions such as schools, churches, government, and political organizations of every sort all tended to direct thought for ends other than truth, for the perpetuation of their own functions, and for the control of individuals in the service of these functions.
Yes.
Um, we've talked about that a little bit. I'm not sure how much you and I, RJ, necessarily agree on that one or not. I very much, agree on that. And I don't necessarily believe that it's always a malicious intent. if one person has truth as they see it, they want to share that truth, maybe deep down to help to, perpetuate that truth and stuff. And so sometimes it's just the nature of the beast that the way we teach becomes, it's for perpetuating that thing
Yeah.
that we represent. So,
I mean, I would have to agree with you.
mhm.
S- if for no other reason than this very book, okay? I love this. I think it should be required reading. I think people should have to read it. But if you did that, right? If you set up, excuse me, part of a curriculum and it had to be taught, you had to learn this to pass, and you had to believe it to pass, then you're doing no better than what he was fighting against
Mm-hmm.
in the book. And that's not what's desired. So I wholeheartedly agree that it's like everything. You have to do the thing because you want to do it. That's part of quality. Doing he tells a story early on about why he does his own maintenance, right? And he talks about taking the bike to a shop, a professional mechanic, and they either broke fins off the cylinder head or broke exhaust studs, or they did some serious damage to the engine. And he talks about their workshop, how it's just loud music and they weren't paying attention and all these things. And it's just that doing things deliberately, paying attention, you know, seeing the quality behind it and doing it for that reason, right? And he gives that more definition later during some of the heavier philosophical portions where he talks about the classical understanding of, and I'm going to pronounce it, arete, which I guess translates to excellence.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this concept of doing the thing that is best because it is best to do that thing. And that's not why those guys in that shop are doing their job. Otherwise, they wouldn't have boogered up his engine, right? He does and takes care of his bike in the way he does because that's what's best and for the best reasons. And that's why he's paying attention and understands these things and doesn't booger up his engine.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
that's a big one to me.
Yeah, for sure. Both show. Let's see. So, let's see. For me, moving on, there was one. We're still kind of early on. We're still I'm at page 131 or so. He's talking about this church. He's talking about this is where the next step with the Church of Reason,
Mm-hmm.
and he's talking about this advertisement, or not advertisement, a newspaper article about a church that had been converted into a bar, and apparently it disturbed a bunch of people.
Mm.
And he says to him, and when he talks about him, it's usually referring to Phaedrus. He says, to him it had revealed an incredible ignorance of what a church really was. Did they think that bricks and boards and glass constituted a church, or the shape of the roof? Here, posing as piety was an example of the very materialism the church opposed. The building in question was not holy ground. It had been desanctified. That was the end of it. The beer sign resided over a bar, not a church, and those who couldn't tell the difference were simply revealing something about themselves.
Right.
Yeah. And
Yeah, he was scathingly critical of the learning institutions.
yeah. Yeah, so that was in reference to a lot of these institutions. It wasn't just in this case a church, but it was in learning institutions, religious institutions, all these other places that couldn't really. It's usually very superficial, and it probably, in a way, touches back on our topic of posers from a week or two ago.
Yeah. Well, and so when you bring up that portion about the Church of Reason, that and Church of Reason being different from the church turned into a bar here.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Um, that's a lot of the stuff he says there when he's speaking about the Church of Reason. the institution, the experiments that he made with his students, with taking away grades, right? That has very much strengthened how I view the accrual of knowledge, right? I'm not, I mean, I'm just a high school graduate, okay? And there's a lot of people that go to college. I'm totally for higher education. Don't take this any wrong way. But they just go to get that piece of paper so that it shows as they go to the next phase. They're not necessarily there for that education. And he speaks to that, and he speaks to the failures or the potential failures of that system. And that, so as an experiment, he takes away the grades. And he found that, well, what he postulated was that if you take grades out of the equation, you're going to lose people. You're going to lose people who are there just for that paper. And then maybe they go out and they get a job with whatever knowledge they have, and they'll be happy for a while. Maybe happy forever. But when they're not happy, then they'll realize, I need this knowledge. I need this information. And when they re-engage that learning institution, they actually have a purpose and a drive. And then that is when they will succeed. Right? And to me, that's the most important thing. You look at like all these great things that are online now where you can take all these courses, right? And a lot of people poo-poo them because, oh, you're not going to get a degree. You're not going to have any proof. No, but I'm going to have the knowledge. And to me, that's what's important. Because I'm facing this world, the most important thing that I do is engage with individuals, right? And so I'm doing it well informed. I'm approaching, so I don't have anything that says I know how to work on a motorcycle. Nothing. Yet I took my 94 Harley FXR, stripped it down to the frame, and completely rebuilt it, rewired it. So I learned. I know what I can do. And to me, that's the most important. I don't have a degree that I can take and show to somebody else. But if I have somebody who's looking and actually listening and talking and saying, I would like to hire someone, and they say, well, what's your experience? Then I can speak to it. And then they can make, the decision whether or not they want to hire me. But I could take a class, get a degree, and not be able to do what I have done. Right?
Yeah.
And that's the same with anything, whether it's culinary school, business degrees, whatever. So.
Yeah. He mentions that a little bit later. I guess talking about something about climbing the mountain to prove how big you are. You're not going to make it, and if you do, you're going to be empty, right? And I think that's kind of what he was referring to there is, badge chasing for the sake of having a badge. So he starts getting. This is probably the point at which he really starts getting pretty deep. I'm looking at our time here.
Yeah. I mean, we knew we weren't going to be able to do what we wanted.
Yeah. So what is the next stop for you on this in this book here? Like, what is?
Well, so I'd gone a little bit further on, and then because this is just the way my brain works, I don't do good with positioning myself, right? Or coming with the knowledge from a dead stop. But when you say, oh, hey, what about this? I found the same thing when, slight aside, when I'm operating in the role of a mentor, right? Or you know, trying to bring my experience to bear for someone else, whether it's in the classroom or helping someone work on their bike. I can't just like sit down and say, okay, let's begin by talking about electrical. Let's begin by talking about air fuel ratios and this and that. But the second they say, my bike's running poorly, it's coughing during acceleration, something like this, then I can now say, okay, let's talk about this, and I'll bring the knowledge I have to bear. So I'm really okay. I say all that to say I'm okay with following your lead and then jumping in,
Okay.
which you probably don't maybe dig necessarily.
No, I'm cool with that. I just
It's the way we
gotcha.
always run.
Yeah.
50 episodes.
50 episodes. Yeah. Let's see. So there was a quote, and I think that you've actually mentioned this before. That's probably worth mentioning again. By before, I mean in a previous podcast episode. He says, I think it's important now to tie care to quality by pointing out that care and quality are internal and external aspects of the same thing. A person who sees quality and feels it as he works is a person who cares. Now, I don't think that that's meant to be a judgment call for somebody who doesn't care, who doesn't see quality or whatever. I think that he's just trying to, I think as he's trying to get to the essence of what quality is, he's suggesting that there's usually some deliberate action to it, and that's putting more effort into it to actually caring about the outcome, the input, all the way throughout. There are people who sometimes go through the motions and they're not really caring, and that's not going to necessarily be quality.
Right.
Yeah,
I don't think he's not damning anyone.
Yeah.
Because they don't sit there and think, I'm chasing quality and doing my job as a librarian.
Yeah. Like, for example, you could have like a 4-year-old who's drawing with crayons a picture of a fire truck. And then you could have Bob Ross drawing that picture of a fire truck. Bob Ross's picture likely would subjectively appear to be better to outsiders, right? But it's quite possible that young child put more care and thought into it. And so it's possible the child's image was of higher quality. In my opinion, that's the way I interpret it. Is that outwardly we could look at these two paintings and compare them and, put them against some test to declare which one's better, right? But as far as quality, it's possible. And Bob Ross actually does put a lot of loving care into his paintings. But
Or did.
But my point being that it's not always necessarily that outcome, I think, in my opinion, that determines the quality.
Yeah.
I can't remember. You and I had a conversation about that at one point. I can't remember if it was on air or off the air, but we were talking about that sometimes the things that I'm more wowed by are those things where I know that somebody put a lot of effort and care and interest into, even if they're considered an amateur at whatever they're doing.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So I had that one. So some of these philosophical parts, he makes his way back. He's going to they're getting to Montana. He talks about his time at the University of Montana where he was teaching. There were a lot of political issues surrounding there. There were a lot of political issues in the country at the time. I think that was around the time of John F. Kennedy's assassination, I believe. But he became obsessed while he was there. This idea of teaching quality. He tried to get rid of grades. He established what he called the Church of Reason. Honestly, to me, the details, like the factual details of what happened thereafter, were a little bit fuzzy. But he eventually made his way to Illinois. He was looking for a place where he could study quality. And he determined that at the time that the University of Chicago had a program, I believe it was a doctoral program that he thought would be ideal for that. And so then he starts talking about his struggles at University of Chicago, first trying to get in. And then as a student, while he's there, he also starts teaching. I think he was actually teaching rhetoric at the University of Illinois. Can't remember what their campus is called there in Chicago, but it was at the Navy Pier or something like that. So he's teaching while studying. And apparently the University of Chicago was going through some tumult at the time as they were struggling, these inner tensions of what they were following. And he kind of got brought into that. And so he had some issues with his professors. This is Phaedrus, not Robert Pirsig. I mean, same guy, but
Right.
He's talking about Phaedrus. He Because of the things that he wrote, I think for his admissions or whatever it was that he had written, he kind of flagged himself as a person to watch out for, and so the professors were kind of gunning for him,
Mm.
and he ended up becoming very, very obsessed with learning everything that he possibly could, not just to outprofess the professors, but I think to understand this stuff. And so
Mm.
he talks about these um, philosophical debates he was getting in the classroom with the professors, revolving around Western philosophy. They talk about Socrates. They talk about he talks about Plato. Talks about Aristotle, and this is honestly where I started to really struggle as far as the history piece,
Right.
and going back and
Same.
forth and talking about the sophists, and he talked about Eastern philosophy a little bit and wrapped that all in there. And he's going back and forth because he, as the father, how would we call him, the reformed Phaedrus, the post insane asylum Phaedrus,
Mm.
the dad, the shell of a man. He's giving his thoughts. He's talking about what Phaedrus is saying. He's talking about what the professor's saying. He's talking about going back and forth, and he's talking about what these philosophers are saying. And so, for me, it was very difficult. It's like almost like I had to have like a notebook there to chart it out.
Right. Well, and
Um,
he has difficulty with it, and he touches on that throughout
well, right, because he's
because
trying to reconcile each of these thoughts.
well, and he only has his current thoughts to filter
Right.
them through.
hmm
So
hmm
he's doing the best that he can to give us what
hmm
Phaedrus did, but
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And so he's going around and around. He wasn't well liked by the other students in the class because they knew that he was partly the reason why the professor had been so aggressive.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, so that's actually getting toward, I guess, toward the end of the book, and
Mhm.
I actually kind of skipped over Gumption. We probably could have talked about Gumption, although Gumption we could probably spend a whole episode talking about Gumption. But so
Definitely.
maybe a future episode we talk specifically on Gumption. Um, but so he's at the University of Chicago. Eventually, this is just driving him insane because he's teaching while studying almost every waking hour and
Right.
pretty much neglecting his family to do so. I'm sure that they had some fun times once in a while. But Chris just kind of probably remembered a madman who was trying to learn this stuff. Um, Help me out here because I'm jumping around.
No, I mean that's where it starts. He uses this part of the book because he's wrapping up his argument with that, right?
hmm
And then at the same time, he's drawing us almost more into the present day with his
hmm
battle with Chris and Chris's battle with who is this man?
hmm
I mean, looks like dad, but doesn't sound like him, right? I think Chris said that you don't sound like yourself or
Right.
whatever. Um, and so I think that he brings that as a writer, he brings more of that current battle for Chris's sanity, as he actually states it, um, to the forefront as well to give that part of the book a concrete mooring, so to speak, right? Um, and then around that time are my two favorite quotes from the end of the book is where he says we always condemn most in others that which we fear in ourselves.
hmm
And I've heard that said different ways as well. And then, one of the main arguments that he's making in the philosophical portions of this book at the end are the arguments between the dialectics and the rhetoric of the philosophy and how dialectic had become just like this grammar kind of based thing almost. And he said, forms and mannerisms, hated by the best, loved by the worst. And do I understand the full import of what he's saying there? Probably not. But to me, what it speaks to as RJ is people worrying more about image or how people view them than actually being a quality individual and letting that drive your actions and how people see you,
Mhm.
right? Because you can't change how they think, right? And so if you're going to chase making people see you better by forms and mannerisms, you're going to lose yourself in that, right? Possibly lose quality in
Mhm.
that. Um, and those who are driving just for quality, they're not thinking about that. It probably comes with, right? Because if you care about these things, you're going to do a better job.
Mhm.
And you need to do a good job, right? Um, so yeah, what do you
Yeah. I think that, so he in that he's touching on the sophists, and I think I see it. You see it in a lot of politicians, right?
right?
And the politicians that are prim and proper, and what they're learning is they're learning how to speak. They're learning how to act, and it's all for the sake of image.
Right.
And they tend to be the most popular ones, and um, in a way that then kind of drives what people, people look at them and people like the image and they say, "Oh, this looks really nice." There was a um, uh, when it was Richard Nixon, a debate, Richard Nixon versus John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy being a very handsome fellow, and Richard Nixon not so much. But during the debate, Richard Nixon, I think prior to the debate, I think he had the flu or something. I mean, so he looked horrible, just
Mm,
absolutely horrible, more horrible than he would normally look. And I'm not, judging either one, the politics of either one. But at the time, I believe that John F. Kennedy was like kind of a little bit unknown. He was young, right? And so um, people didn't necessarily, he didn't have a lot of people didn't have faith in him. They liked him because he was very charismatic.
right.
But it was said that that debate had a huge impact on the outcome of that election because Nixon just looked so horrible. And people on the outside, all they could see was this man who looked weak and sick and probably had the chills and everything else. And they see this
Right.
other young guy. And it was to the point where they weren't even paying attention to what the contents of the debate were. Um, and so I think that's very true, is that we focus a little bit more on the form than on what is, the substance um, inside that form. I think that one of my takeaways, and it's kind of relevant to something I'm working on now, and this has to do with his kind of incessant pursuit. He says what he said was megalomaniacal, sorry, megalomaniacal. But suppose it was true. If he was wrong, who would care? But suppose he was right. To be
Mm,
right and throw it away in order to please the predilections of his teachers, that would be the monstrosity.
right.
And I was actually, it's kind of like this project I'm working on right now, this long term project, which I wish I could just pretend had never happened, and I could get back thousands of hours and get my life back. Um, but I feel like there's something to it. I feel like if I could complete it, there could be something worthwhile.
Right.
Um, and if it turns out to be nothing worthwhile, then it's not going to have much impact on anybody else. But if I ditch it, and it could have been something, then I would be in the wrong. But he 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 finds this thread of quality, and he sees it as something that's very profound and something that needs to be taught and something that needs to be pursued, and
Right.
that becomes his quest. Um, in a way, I guess he could be considered a Don Quixote trying to chase after this idea of quality, and that sets that really that's pretty much him throughout. And then toward the end, a couple of um, things that relate to that. If I can, where's my? Feel like, man, I lost something here. in my notes, but he talks about it later.
Right.
You're gonna need to fill this empty space here while I.
Okay. While you're looking for that portion. Yeah. Well, so just while you're looking for that, I'm gonna give a few of my major takeaways for the story and the experience of reading it. Um, so just speaking to, have you found it?
I'm getting there. Go ahead.
Okay. So just speaking to, not giving up that thing in case it is what it could be or what it's supposed to be. Not supposed as in intent, but as I suppose that I suppose a rose is a rose, right? So if that's what it is, if you man, it looks like that's what it is, I need to go for it. That's very important,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't want to let go of it because think of it. So taking it at face value, this drive that Phaedrus had, no matter where it took him, and perhaps because it took him there, and then what the narrator does with it as he brings it back all together and synthesizes it, is what makes this book, and what makes this book still relevant 47 years later, right? That chase wasn't in vain, no matter what happened to him at the time, because it built and pressed forward into this story and the follow-on book, Lila, which is also very, very good. Quite different, but very good. Um, that just to me speaks directly to that. It would have been a monstrosity,
Mm-hmm.
a loss, a huge loss that we would have never understood was lost if Phaedrus hadn't pushed, and in fact, if he had pushed and gotten it and just succeeded, whatever that looks like, this book wouldn't have happened, right? It's that he pushed, faltered, maybe, and regrouped himself at a later date that we get the book we have.
Mm-hmm.
That we get the story and the excuse me, the foundation of what will become Pirsig's metaphysics of quality only could have happened by the path that was trod,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so he had to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, and I think about the idea of if would his life, would he have considered it worth living if he were living it any less, right? So like to him this becomes the meaning for him, and he could give it up because that's what society tells him to do. But conforming to society and taking something lesser um, may not be the life to live. And he touches on it a little bit later. When he's talking. This is way toward the end, one of the last few pages. He's talking about Chris, and he's talking about seeing it in Chris. He says,
Mm-hmm.
we write again, and what comes to me now is the realization that he's another Phaedrus, thinking the way he used to and acting the same way he used to, looking for trouble, being driven by forces he's only dimly aware of and doesn't understand. The
Mm,
questions, the same questions, he's got to know everything. And
right.
then the quote that I highlighted comes, and he says, and if he doesn't get the answer, he just drives and drives until he gets one, and that leads to another question, and he drives and drives for the answer to that, endlessly pursuing questions, never seeing, never understanding. The questions will never end. Something is
Right.
missing, and he knows it, and will kill himself trying to find it.
Right.
And that whole thing, for me, sums up a lot of my rabbit holes,
Mm,
honestly. Yesterday I spent probably 12, 14 hours down here in the basement working on this thing I'm programming, and it was like one thing led to another, and like I just always felt like I was almost there, right? And
Right.
that one thing would get me there, and then it was just like one more thing and one more thing and one more thing. And that's how it is with everything, you
Hmm.
know. But I guess that's quality. I don't know. I like to tell myself it is. It's caring, right?
It's quality when it has the the basis or the foundation behind it that is ultimately headed somewhere,
Mm,
right? Because so what you're doing is not like what he's describing in Chris.
mm,
What he's describing in Chris is right now Chris doesn't have that foundation that says this is why you're doing the things you're doing,
mm,
right? Why you're experiencing the world you're experiencing it as you're experiencing it. Um, you know where you're working toward,
mm.
and so it's not a blind following of question after question, but it's related.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. So, as we said early on, we could go on for hours, and I would like to do a future episode about gumption.
Oh yeah.
And we'll probably end up having to skip next week's episode because of your move and getting
Mm.
prepared for that and stuff. And I'm not sure when we'll pick back up. And I'm not sure if I'll be able to find, maybe do an interview or something a couple times in the meantime. But I think we'll hold off on gumption for another episode. We could talk specifically about gumption because I like the way he captures the gumption traps.
Oh yeah.
Um, but what you know, were there any key conclusions or takeaways? Short things that you were left with, or is there something that like would be the next step for you after having read this? Like like what action would you take? What was the call to action, as they call
I mean, for me, the first time I read it, it really brought me closer toward um, kind of living in the moment,
it? Mm-hmm.
right? Like mindfulness, because he speaks to it. I don't know that mindfulness meditation had existed as a thing yet at this point, but that presence, that mindfulness, that paying attention to the world around you, that's what he is talking about as he's talking about being on the bike, right? And so that was one of the main things that I first took away from it. And I started to walk down that path of being more aware, living more deliberately. Um, you know, I did not take off on any deep philosophical rabbit holes of study, right? Based off of it. I could easily and probably should so that I better understand some of the arguments he makes throughout the book. But, you know, if you glance at a painting very quickly and then look away, and then someone asks you, what's the what's what color feeling does it give you, or how do you feel after seeing it? That's what I'm describing when I talk about it led me to this being more deliberate
Mm-hmm.
and mindful of my actions, my thoughts, how I interact with others. That's for me.
Mm-hmm.
How about you? Does it give you a moral imperative to follow after, or do you feel anything?
I guess for me, it's really the reflection of what I'm chasing. What how I'm interpreting things. As I see them, as I feel them, the world around me, what people say, uh, what they do. It's just maybe another a layer, I guess, for processing that information and being aware of maybe where it's coming from. And like I said, in a way, this was chicken soup for me because I feel there are some similarities between me and Phaedrus at times.
Mm,
And when I feel myself starting to reach that point of insanity, in that chase, then maybe it's this will give me a little bit more pause,
Yeah.
thinking about how the world perceives it, right? But the philosophy section at the end definitely gave me a lot to think about. I've never spent a lot of time. I probably spend a lot of time philosophizing, but I do not have much of an educational background in philosophy.
Hmm.
Whether I care to or not, I'm not really sure. But I definitely, and I mentioned this to you prior to the show, but maybe do a little bit of reading into Eastern philosophy. He had mentioned Tao Te Ching, is that how it's pronounced? Something like that. Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. Uh, and some have said, I believe that that's what he really kind of considered quality all along was some of that. It's not a very long read. I think it's maybe like 100 pages or so. So maybe that would be something fun for us to read through and talk about.
Yeah, he
Um,
he definitely views the Tao as a potential equivalent,
mhm,
if not so close it's can you discern them
mhm,
between the Tao and quality, for
yeah.
sure.
So, so yeah, I guess that's what it is for me. I tried to start reading Lila, the second book. I couldn't get into it, and it probably was the time that I started reading it.
Hmm.
Um, uh, and I mentioned before I was having after a concussion, I was having trouble with reading
Hmm.
for a while. So maybe I could pick it back up sometime, maybe the summer or something if I get time. But
Yeah, I think it's definitely it's not a prerequisite, but I think one should have an appreciation for the first novel
mhm,
to be able to have an appreciation. I mean, it builds on it.
mhm,
The subtitle is like a further inquiry,
mhm.
something like this. So it's definitely set up to be a continuation.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So, and I, the other thing for me, I think, is I really want to kind of spend a little more time noodling on that whole idea of the mythos. And I'm aware of those things, and I've been aware of those things, but bringing it to the forefront and really thinking through it a lot more in the way that I work with others and deal with others, and know that if I'm trying to sell an idea or approach something, I have to be more aware of the fact that they're coming at it differently. They've got a different frame of reference,
Right.
and so I have to consider that in the approach. So yeah, it was definitely. I thought it was a great book. It's not for everybody, which is why you have some people who absolutely love it, and you have some people who are haters, and that's okay. I think that that's the case with all good books.
Hmm.
I thought that Thoreau's Walden was a great book, but that's not for everybody. Um, so it's. I think going back to the beginning of this podcast, it's your mindset when you're reading it,
Hmm.
and your mindset could be different every time you read it. You could take away a different story.
Right.
Um, that's the case with any story, but I think there's a lot in here. It's a very heavy book to unpack.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I would venture to say that if you're a listener of this podcast and you enjoy this podcast and how we approach things and think about things, and if any of it resonates with you or the way you process, most likely you're going to find some enjoyment
mhm,
in this book.
yeah, yeah, I definitely wouldn't consider it a quick read. If you've read it before,
Mm.
yeah, you could maybe do it in
I still can.
a quick read. But I think it's one of those books that you dedicate. You try to commit yourself to reading a few pages a day, 10 pages a day, a dozen pages a day over the course of a few weeks, and let it sink in and kind of reflect on it. I think that's one of those, going back to his quote about, about the journey. Actually,
Mm.
maybe that might not be the right quote for this, but, take the time to enjoy it and to digest it and to think through it. Um, so yeah.
I mean, I think it's both. I think it's the journey is super important in the
Hmm.
book or with the book,
Hmm.
and also the destination is important
Hmm.
because he doesn't say the destination isn't important.
Right.
He says sometimes it's better to travel than to arrive,
Right.
and that I think is where that key distinction
Yeah.
lies.
Yeah.
But well, so just all in all, I mean, obviously you said you liked it, but
Hmm.
do you? I would assume you're happy you read it.
Mm-hmm.
again, and you would recommend it, although it's not necessarily for everyone.
I
think
would
it's for
recommend it
everyone.
to the right people.
Yeah.
It's like with college. You're talking about higher education, the Church of Reason, and when people go to college, I would not recommend it to somebody who simply wants to check a box and say that they've read it.
Right.
I would recommend it to somebody who is at a point where they're receptive to the knowledge, where reading it would actually be beneficial to them.
Right.
If that's fair. I mean, yeah.
I think so. I mean, I think
Mhm.
that's anything,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the way to approach life.
Right.
A receptive mind that can
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily wrap in, right? Just to move away from the book. I mean, you don't just believe the last thing that you saw in a video, right?
Mm-hmm.
You may believe it now because of the research and facts behind it, but you read everything with a critical eye.
Mm-hmm.
You think about it. You read it and you take it in deliberately and say, okay, how does this square with everything else I understand?
Mm-hmm.
You don't just go around the internet and somebody says, oh, this is true, and say, oh, this is true. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Do some research. Use the old noggin.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For sure. So let's go ahead and wrap this one up then,
Sounds good.
and we'll put a pin in Gumption,
Gumption, yeah.
Gumption Traps for a future episode. What do you have going on in the next several days? I think you're prepping for move, right?
Yes,
Yep, it's gonna be a full
that
time job.
is
Yep,
that is it.
very cool.
How about you?
Well,
How
I'm
the
technically.
cabinets coming along? You didn't tell me about the cabinets.
I should have thrown up a picture. So the cabinets are pretty close to done. So the base cabinets are pretty much done. I've got a couple minor things I need to work on with them, but for the most part, the base cabinets are done, and I think they look pretty good. I have to make a couple of small internal shelves inside a couple of cabinets, but they're pretty much done. And then the next would be building the top shelves. I guess what are like hutches.
Okay.
That maybe won't take me as long. It shouldn't take me as long. But my wife wants this. She wants the backs to have like this beadboard kind
Okay.
of, but because it's all solid walnut, it means I have to custom cut the boards and get a router bit for doing the beadboards, and so that's going to be a tedious pain in the rump. Um, but that's not; those aren't necessarily urgent. It's just one of those things where she wants the project eventually finished.
Yeah.
But everything is currently usable in its state now. We just still have a bunch of books that need to get put away, and so until I get those shelves done, we can't put them away. But I did. I was getting so close to the end that I wasn't taking the time to stop and film all of the last bits, and so there may be some parts in this video if I ever get around to editing it that are missing or a little bit hastily done. But honestly, I've got so many hours of video that it may not even be noticeable to people watching it.
Yeah.
So yeah, the cabinet's pretty close to done. So then I got my college class that I'm working on for web programming. At the same time, I'm trying to finish up this web programming project, and that's actually been the project has been my focus because we're technically on spring break for the next week
Okay.
for the class. So I don't know, man. It's a project I should have never gotten into. So I've got a vision for something, and I can convince some people of that vision, but others don't see the vision. So yeah, again, I don't know if I'm
Doesn't mean it's not good.
don't know if I'm Don Quixote and tilting the windmills or what.
Yeah.
So that's taking up a lot of my time.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm making progress.
Cool.
So, well, I guess that's it for this episode, and it may be it for a week or two
Yeah.
until you get back on the other
most likely.
side. Till you get back on the other side, so we'll figure that out. RJ, I wish you all the best in your move, getting everything
Thanks, man.
packed up, and it's never easy. But
No.
once those boxes are packed, it might feel kind of good.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Might do.
Yeah. So to the listeners out there, I'll actually look at the camera for this. Thanks for
Ooh.
listening. Thanks for watching. If you're watching, if you want to give us some feedback or suggest some future topics, you can hit us up at chasingqualitypodcast@gmail.com.
Mm.
If you're watching this, you're already watching it from our YouTube channel, so I'm not even going to mention that. But if you're listening, we do have a YouTube channel, and we are recording this episode, so we're going to put it up on YouTube, and so you can watch it there if you want to watch it.
Yeah, and potentially if this does well, if
Mhm.
people take to this,
Yeah.
we could do more
Yeah.
in this fashion.
Yeah, video doesn't really take that much longer. A little bit longer. It's a couple extra steps, but I can streamline a lot of it. So it's not really too big of a deal to upload a video too. So. All right, RJ. Until next time, keep chasing that quality. You know we will.
Peace.